As I've said, anything about Java, you gotta show me a context before I can answer, because just the term Java itself can mean different things.
Well, let me try to approach it this way. Mr. Gates, have you ever told anyone, regardless of what you meant by it, that you wanted to undermine Java, or undermine Sun, or undermine Java because of Sun, any of those?
And to be completely precise, the actual question is merely whether the witness recalls using that particular word, regardless of meaning, just that word.
Yes, and if he does recall, I'll ask him what he meant by it.
I understand.
I said I don't recall using that word.
Would it have been consistent with the way that you felt about Sun and about Java for you to have used that word? And if you don't understand the question, I'll rephrase it.
Well, Sun's message to the market and ours aren't the same. And so there is, as part of that competition, a desire to get people to understand our message and what we're providing versus their message and what they're providing. So in that sense, there could have been a discussion around that topic, but I still don't know if the word undermined was ever used.
Did you have discussions with Apple that were directed towards attempting to reduce or eliminate competition, Mr. Gates?
Objection.
No.
Did you have discussions with Apple in which you were trying to get Apple to agree to help you undermine Sun?
There was some discussion about what runtime APIs Apple would support, whether they would support some of ours or some of Sun's. I don't think I was involved in any discussions myself with Apple about that.
Well, let me show you a document and try to probe what you mean by being involved. Let me give you a copy of a document that has been previously marked as Government Exhibit 365. A portion of this document is an email message from you to Paul Moritz and others. And the portion that I'm particularly interested in, and you can read as much of the 3-line email as you wish, is the last sentence, which reads, quote, "Do we have a clear plan on what we want Apple to do to undermine Sun?" Close quotes. Did you send this email, Mr. Gates, on or about August 8th, 1997?
I don't remember sending it.
Do you have any doubt that you sent it?
No, it appears to be email I sent.
You recognize that this is a document produced from Microsoft's files, do you not, sir?
No.
You don't?
Well, how would I know that?
Well, do you see the document production numbers down at the bottom?
I have no idea what those numbers are.
Do you recognize this as the form in which email has been printed out by Microsoft?
I don't know what that means. It's all email printed by anyone looks just like this. So the fact that it looks like this doesn't give you any clues to who printed it.
Well, let's begin with that, sir. Email printed out by other people are not stamped with Microsoft confidential stamps and Microsoft document production numbers. You would agree with that, would you
It
not?
has nothing to do with printing out.
Do you understand my question, sir?
No.
Okay. Do you see down at the bottom where there are confidential stamps and a stamp that says attorneys only and document production stamps? Do you see those?
I see the stamps. I can't characterize whether they're document production stamps. To me, they look more like you'd see on a prisoner's uniform.
So that you don't have any knowledge about these stamps. It is your testimony.
I've never seen a stamp like that. I've never used a stamp like that.
Haven't you seen stamps like that in every single one of the documents that you've been shown during this deposition?
Can you get me all the exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Is this a good use of time?
Well, when he says he's never seen them before,
You asked about
you know,
the stamp.
he's never seen the stamp before, and he's been shown 40 documents.
Just a waste.
It is a waste of time, and I think it is absolutely
Let's get on to
clear
the
who the
question.
witness
Have a
is doing it.
deposition, shall
We're
we?
trying to have a deposition.
Can you look at that one?
Yes, the one that has this document production stamp and this confidential stamp down in the bottom right-hand corner, is that the one you mean, Mr. Gates?
Is that a stamp? To me, that's not a stamp.
Is it this?
Let's move on.
Mr. Heiner, I understand why you want to move
Relax,
on.
relax. There must be some way to break through. Just
I think
try a
there must be.
different question.
I think there must be. But part of what I want to do is I want to get on the record the way this witness answers questions. I think I'm entitled to do
The witness already testified
that.
that it appears to be email he sent he doesn't recall sending. That's what you need, that's what you have. He's not familiar with the discovery process of some paralegals. That's the testimony right now, and that's not important.
Well, part of the testimony was that he'd never seen the stamp before when he's seen it 40 times in this deposition, and I think that goes to this witness's credibility.
Come on.
And I think this witness's credibility is an important issue in this case.
You don't care about stamps. Ask the questions
I don't care about
the
stamps.
substance
What I
of the
care
man.
about is credibility. And whether the witness is being forthright in his answers. And I think I'm entitled to test that when he says things that are as remarkable as the fact that he's never seen a document production stamp like this before, in this case, after how long the case has gone on.
You're not going to stand up in court and talk about stamps.
You're probably right about that. Let me go back to the email, Mr. Gates. What did you mean when you asked Mr. Moritz whether or not, quote, we have a clear plan on what we want Apple to do to undermine Sun, close quote?
I don't remember.
Did you personally participate in any conversations with Apple in 1997 or 1998?
Of any kind?
Let me be a little more specific. Did you participate in any conversations with Apple in 1997 or 1998 concerning what Apple would or would not do that would affect Microsoft competitively?
Well, there were some conversations with Steve Jobs about Microsoft Office. And a relationship we formed around that and some other issues.
And did you participate in those conversations?
I talked to Steve Jobs on the phone, I think, twice.
And what was the nature of your conversations with Mr. Jobs?
Well, Steve called me up and said that he'd become the CEO of Apple, sort of, and that Gil Amelio wasn't the CEO of Apple. And he raised the question of, was there some beneficial agreement that we could enter into, different than we'd been discussing with Gil. And it wasn't a very long call, but the conclusion was that Greg Maffei would go see Steve.
What is Mr. Maffei's title?
At that time,
What is his title today?
his title today is CFO.
Of Microsoft? Chief Financial Officer? And what was his title at the time?
I think treasurer.
When did Mr. Maffei go to talk to Mr. Jobs?
I don't recall the date.
Approximately.
Sometime in '97.
This was after your conversation with Mr. Jobs?
Yes.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. Jobs or anyone else at Apple after your 1997 conversation with Mr. Jobs?
I had a brief conversation with him again in '97, the night before a Macworld speech that he was giving, where I appeared as part of that speech, but it was about my role in his speech.
I'm going to leave that aside.
Well, it all relates to the agreement with Apple.
Okay, then I won't leave it aside. What did you say to him, and what did he say to you about the agreement with Apple?
I said, it's not signed yet. What are we going to do about this presentation if it doesn't get signed? And he said he hoped it would be signed, and then we talked about the logistics of appearing by video conference in the middle of his speech.
Have you completed your answer?
Yes.
Other than the two telephone, or I guess one telephone conversation, one in person, was the brief conversation you just recounted one in person?
No, that was on the phone.
That was
He
on
was
the
in
phone.
Boston, I was in Seattle. That's why I had to do a video conference to be in his speech.
So that both of your conversations with Mr. Jobs in 1997 were by telephone? Is that correct?
There may have also been some email between Steve and I. I don't think there were any more phone calls, but the two I've described are both phone calls. There were no face-to-face meetings that I remember.
Other than the 2 telephone calls and leaving email aside, did you have any conversations, either by telephone or in person, with any representative of Microsoft in 1997 or 1998?
Yes.
You misspoke, I
Apple.
think you said Microsoft and Apple.
Other than the 2 telephone conversations with Mr. Jobs that you have already identified, during 1997 or 1998, did you have any conversations by telephone or in person with any representative of Apple?
I'm trying to think when Heidi Roizen quit Apple. I think she'd quit by 97, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she'd quit by then, so no, I don't think so.
Do I take it from that answer that you had a conversation with Heidi Roizen?
At some point in time that I can't remember, yes.
Okay. And do I also take it that at some point Heidi Roizen left Apple?
That's right.
And that your conversation with Heidi Roizen was while she was at Apple?
Not all of my conversations with her, but the ones that I thought would be responsive to your questions related to the time of her employ at Apple. I've had other conversations with Heidi Roizen, both before she worked at Apple and after she worked at Apple.
Where does she now work?
She doesn't have a job at this point.
Other than your possible conversations during the period with Heidi Roizen and the 2 telephone conversations in 1997 with Mr. Jobs, did you have any other conversations, either by telephone or in person, with any representative of Apple in 1997 or 1998?
No, I don't think so.
To your knowledge, did any representative of Microsoft have any meetings or telephonic discussions
Certainly.
with any representatives of Apple
Certainly.
in 1998 concerning competitive issues?
I don't know what you mean by competitive issues, but there's a ongoing contact with Apple. We're the largest developer of software for the Apple Macintosh, and so there's constant discussion with Apple.
And as the largest developer of software for the Macintosh, is what you do important to Apple?
Sometimes it doesn't seem like it. We always think of it as important, but sometimes they don't treat it that way. Sometimes they do.
You mentioned discussions with respect to Office. Would you explain for the record what you're talking about there?
Microsoft Office.
Microsoft Office for Macintosh?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that Microsoft Office for Macintosh was believed by Apple to be very important to them?
I really have a hard time testifying about the belief of a corporation. I really don't know what that means.
Well, sir, in making the decision that you would ask of Apple, did you believe that what you were offering Apple with respect to Microsoft Office for Macintosh was important enough to Apple so that they ought to give you something for it.
I have no idea what you're talking about when you say ask.
Well, let me show you a document that has been previously marked as a Government Exhibit 366. This is a document bearing Microsoft Document Production stamps MS98011095 through 53. The first part of this purports to be a copy of an email from Don Bradford to Ben Waldman with a copy to you, Mr. Moritz, and others on the subject of, quote, Java on Macintosh /IE control. Did you receive a copy of this email on or about February 13th, 1998?
I don't know.
Do you have any reason to doubt that you received a copy of this email?
No.
The first paragraph reads, quote, Apple wants to keep both Netscape and Microsoft developing browsers for Mac, believing if one drops out, the other will lose interest, and also not really wanting to pick up the development burden. Getting Apple to do anything that significantly, materially disadvantages Netscape will be tough. Do you agree that Apple should be meeting, it reads, do agree that Apple should be meeting the spirit of our cross-license agreement and that Mac Office is the perfect club to use on them? Do you have an understanding of what Mr. Bradford means when he refers to Mac Office as, quote, the perfect club to use on Apple, close quote?
No.
The second sentence of that paragraph, the one that reads, getting Apple to do anything that significantly, materially disadvantages Netscape will be tough. Was it your understanding in February of 1998 that Microsoft was trying to get Apple to do something that would disadvantage Netscape?
No.
Do you know why Mr. Bradford would have written this in February of 1998 and sent a copy to you?
I'm not sure.
Did you ever say to Mr. Bradford, in words or in substance, in February of 1998 or thereafter, Mr. Bradford, you got it wrong. We're not out to significantly or materially disadvantage Netscape through Apple?
No.
Did you ever tell Mr. Bradford or anyone else in February 1998 or thereafter that they should not be trying to get Apple to do things that would significantly or materially disadvantage Netscape?
No.
All right. What was Mr. Bradford's position in February of 1998?
think he had a small group in California that worked. I'm not sure who he worked for. He probably worked for somebody who worked for Silverberg. No. No, I'm not sure who he worked for.
Well, let's begin with what company he worked for. He clearly worked for Microsoft, correct, sir?
That's right.
And do you know what his title was?
No.
Do you know who Mr. Waldman is?
Yes.
What was his title in February of 1998?
I don't know.
What were his responsibilities in February of 1998?
He ran a group that was doing Macintosh software. Neither of these guys have a title like vice president, that I can say for sure. So they have a title like engineer or software engineer manager, but I don't know their title. They're not executives.
In addition to you and Mr. Moritz, copies of this go to David Cole, Dave Reed, Charles Fitzgerald, and John Devon. Do you know what Mr. Cole's position was in 1998?
Yes.
What was it?
He was the VP, actually I don't know the VP, but he was a VP, working for, I don't know if we'd reorganized by then. He was in Moritz's organization somewhere.
What was Mr. Reed's position at that time?
I have no familiarity with Mr. Reed.
Do you have any familiarity with Mr. Fitzgerald and Mr. Devon?
Yes.
What were their positions?
Charles Fitzgerald was in the evangelism group working for Todd Nielsen. Todd Nielsen.
And Mr. Devon?
Mr. Devon was managing the overall office development.
Did you have any conversations with anyone within Microsoft as to what position Microsoft should take with Apple in terms of what Microsoft should ask Apple for in return for Microsoft developing Mac Office?
What time frame are you in?
1997 or 1998?
Well, it actually makes a big difference. We reached an agreement with Apple in 1997, and I'm not aware of any agreement other than the 1997 one.
Could I have the question read back?
Did you have any conversations with anyone within Microsoft as to what position Microsoft should take with Apple in terms of what Microsoft should ask Apple for in return for Microsoft developing Mac Office?
I'm not sure what you're saying about Mac Office. We develop Mac Office because it's a profitable business for us.
Well, you threatened to cancel Mac Office, did you not, sir?
No.
You never threatened Apple that you were going to cancel Mac Office? Is that your testimony?
That's right.
Did you ever discuss within Microsoft threatening Apple that you were going to cancel MacOffice?
You wouldn't cancel, no.
Let me show you a copy of a document that we are marking as Government Exhibit 367. This is another document bearing document production numbers from the Microsoft document production. The second item on the first page purports to be an email message from Ben Waldman to you,
No?
dated June 27, 1997.
It's not to me.
Well, the one I'm looking at says, from